What's up? Hello everyone, welcome into Fantasy Filmball. I'm just going to preface this video by saying we recorded these predictions a while ago. We recorded on November 25th. As I'm editing it, it is currently December 5th. That's because I've been applying to grad schools, zero time for editing, so these predictions may be a little bit out of date. Just forgive us wherever it feels like the information is no longer relevant. Things change so fast at this time of year. I'm just determined to get these out before the Golden Globes. So sorry that these are late, and thank you for your patience. Now, back to the video.
Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name's Dyl, and we're back again with our November Oscar updates. We've done Best Picture. We've done the acting category, so if you want to see our thoughts there, consider subscribing down below. Go check out those videos. But today, we had Best Director, we had Best Screenplay for both categories, and I mean, a lot's changed in the week since we last recorded and we put out that video.
A lot has changed. Wicked is out in theaters. Well, Glicked is out in theaters, but really Wicked is out in theaters. That's the one that matters of this. I do have a little tribute to Wicked right here with the backlighting that I'm gonna have this whole thing, so watch out for those Wicked lens flares. But yeah, Wicked is out and it's on track to be a massive hit. Do you think this is gonna be like a contender for biggest movie of the year in the box office?
Biggest movie of the year in the box office? No. Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine are both at like 1.5 billion, and I think Moana 2 might be the movie to reach those heights. Wicked, I would expect this to do like 700 to 900 worldwide. That would put it top 5, top 6 of the year over Dune Part 2. So it should be the biggest Oscar contender, at least in our Best Picture race in terms of box office. And I mean, I know we're talking about director and screenplay here today, but I think if we're talking about biggest film of the year, the Golden Globes have that new fun category, box office achievement. I think Wicked will probably be taking that one.
I always have to ask you about box office stuff because I don't know anything about it. Because I could easily sit here and be like, Wicked's making $2 billion, and, you know, you gotta rein it in for me.
Enough about box office. Yeah. We're talking Oscars here. Best Director. I still have Denis Villeneuve at my number 1 for Dune Part 2. You could call me crazy. My biggest stance for this is I look at the landscape here of our possible contenders, and no one is leaping off the page to me in terms of a walkaway sweeper, as we've had like every season for like the past 4 or 5 years, going all the way back to 2019. Every year was essentially a sweep for whoever was the Best Director winner. This year, I don't see that for Sean Baker and Anora, even if I think that film is the current frontrunner for Best Picture. And then you have like Jaka Audiard for Emilia Perez, which has the potential, but also, I mean, I don't really believe in the whole Twitter backlash, but this film was divisive before it hit the mainstay, and I think this is a film that may have people really show up for it. You could think of something like the EFAs or the BAFTAs or the Golden Globes. But at the same time, they have another option of someone like Brady Corbet for The Brutalist, which I keep saying this on the channel and I know people will continue to disagree. Just for me, The Brutalist, I need to see it perform first before I can fully buy into it. The rollout for the type of film that it is, it screams the film that people appreciate more than they love, and those type of films don't end up winning in the long run. Yes, you can point out something like Roma. Yes, you can point out something like The Power of the Dog. The difference there is those directors were very acclaimed, but very in the club before that film. Brady Corbet, he's never been in this conversation before. To me, it seems like the nomination is going to be his reward at the end of the day. Denis seems like he has industry support behind him. Now, will that come to fruition this time around? The groundwork was there for Part 1, but I think the biggest thing that's different here is that this is the culmination of the Dune novel. Messiah is coming a few years down the line, but Warner Brothers has been out there on the campaign trail already, having Denis out there, having him with very respected directors. He's done interviews with James Cameron. He's been out there with Christopher Nolan, our Best Director one of last year, who will only get more intensive the closer that we get to more nominations. I don't really feel like he'll be like a critics type push, so the next month may not look great for Denis. It may go a lot to Baker, Corbet, Audiard, maybe Ramel Ross pops his head up and wins a few original critics, but I think if we get to like Golden Globes, we get to BAFTA, if he wins those, I think it is going to be potentially another sweep.
This is a fun time of year. I love when we look at a category like this and we're on completely separate wavelengths. Currently, you have Denis Villeneuve at number 1. I have Denis Villeneuve at number 6. And that's because if he didn't get nominated for the first one, why is he getting nominated for this one? If this is going to be a smaller tech player than the last, which it is, it's not winning 6 Oscars again, I don't see why there's a reason to give him the director nomination that he missed last time. I don't think that the Golden Globes, who did give him a nomination last time, or the BAFTAs, or the DGA, or the Critics' Choice, I don't see why they would need to give him a win this time when they nominated him last time for the same stuff, and they didn't give him a win then. I just don't see the reason why he would be a winner. You can point to, this is a weird field where no one feels quite right. Sean Baker could easily be a sweeper, but that's a film that relies much more on the writing and the performances than it does on the direction or the visual language. It doesn't feel like a directing winner. Of course, there's The Brutalist, which has that visual language. It has that epic component, the 3.5 hour long runtime, the intermission. It is clearly a director's vision. It is also, like you keep saying, and like I keep saying, a film that people respect more than they love. And that can still be a ticket to a directing win. We saw that with The Power of the Dog. We saw it with Roma. There's a lot of films that will pick up the directing prize that struggle to get to Best Picture. So even without a picture win, The Brutalist can still win. That said, I just struggle to see the reason why people would go for it when I don't think it's really in the conversation for a Best Picture win right now, whereas something like Roma or Power of the Dog were in that conversation. There's Ramel Ross. He's so artsy and so unique and different, but that's the type of thing that's not going to win. The nomination truly is the win. But to me, I go to Jacques Audiard. I see Emilia Perez being a bigger film in terms of awards chances. I see it being top 2 or top 3 in the Best Picture convo, whereas I don't see The Brutalist being top 3 at this point. The visual language, the style over substance, the very in-your-face style of that film, how fast the camera moves, the flashiness of the editing, it's a big vision and it's a huge swing. They went hard for that movie. The tech elements are all there. This is going to be likely the nomination leader. Minimum, it's winning 3 Oscars. It could win up to 6. All of that saying to me that Jacques Audiard is the name I'm looking out for when we get to those precursors. I don't think he's going to pick up many regional critic groups. I think that's going to be largely Brady Corbet. But I think when we get to the Golden Globes, we see Audiard win. Critics' Choice, they're going to go with Brady Corbet or Sean Baker, one of those two. I see BAFTA being between Corbet and Audiard, and I see DGA. I think in the end of the day, they're going to go with Emilia Perez. That's the path I'm seeing for Audiard right now, but I don't think this is going to be a clean season for this category. I think this is going to be filled with doubt. We're not going to know who the front runner is until it happens. Otherwise, it could just be the easy choice. They could just go Sean Baker and say, well, we can't form a consensus around which of the big visual films we want to go with. Let's just go with something simple and effective, which is Anora.
Personally, I would love this season in terms of the director field. Throw it back to like 2019, where like it felt like everybody was going with a different winner. We had Sam Mendes at some places. We had Bong Joon-ho at some places. We had, I think, I could be misremembering, we had Martin Scorsese at least at one place for The Irishman. I would love if this season kind of paralleled that with the director field. When we watch other people's videos or we read other people's articles who are doing predictions, everyone just feels in such a consensus that Corbet is sweeping it, at least to me. I just don't really feel that whatsoever. And I mean, sure, maybe it's not Denis Villeneuve. Maybe the industry does not actually come out into support for him like they have seemed like they've been doing so far. Maybe it is Jacques Audiard for Emilia Perez, but maybe that film ends up being too divisive, or maybe the visual language of that film hits very well for international voters, but doesn't translate as much for American voters. And then to me, it's just like, where do we go from there? And the next person I want to talk about, I don't think has a shot at all to win, but I think people are being very dismissive of this director to potentially slide in, especially at DGA, especially at Golden Globes, hell, maybe even at Critics' Choice for a surprise director nomination in these places where they do 6 or they just do not do international directors. And I'm ready for the comments to rain down to say how stupid this is, because Matt mentioned it before, the backlighting in his video looks not the best, but John M. Chu is doing so much with Wicked, and he has built up so much cred through his career, clearly not with the award spaces, but with specific types of audiences out there, and I feel like maybe Wicked could be the culmination of that, not to a full Oscar nomination, not to a top 3 type contender in the director field, but popping in at places throughout the season, because while yes, the lighting may be an issue throughout Wicked, you cannot sit here and tell me that Wicked is a visually ugly film, because he is doing so many creative things with the camera. He's doing a lot visually inside this film, and he easily could slide in at, like I said, Golden Globe, Critics' Choice, and DGA.
I completely agree with you. John M. Chu should not be written off. He has been really good at elevating material that's not great. You can even look back to his Step Up movies, and he's a damn good director, even in content that's not fantastic. And he really showed his stuff with Crazy Rich Asians, In the Heights, and now Wicked, I do think, is his best movie. He's just doing so much with it. Camera's just whipping around. The way the camera dances with the actors, that's what a musical should be. He is, I think, the best director that we have working in musicals right now. Very funny that Jacques Audiard is also in the conversation for a musical, but it's definitely not as dynamic direction as what John Chu does with Wicked. You're gonna call me a hypocrite for this. I have a feeling he's gonna get a couple of the precursors, like you said. I think he gets Critics' Choice. I think he maybe Golden Globes. He could pick up a few nominations, miss the Oscar, and then I think he could get the nomination next year for Wicked 2, because I do feel like the second act is more grand in scope. Act 1 is the university, Act 2 is everything outside of Shiz. So, I'm a hypocrite though, because I'm also saying Denis Villeneuve, why didn't they, if they were gonna nominate him for part 2, they would have nominated him for part 1. But now I'm here saying the opposite for Wicked, so call me a hypocrite, I don't care, but I'm not predicting John Chu for this one. I might for the next.
Yeah, I'm not predicting him here either. As you see in my list here, he's number 8, he's number 9. I just feel like he is going to pop his head out. I go back to last year where I was very adamant all season long. Alexander Payne was not getting in for the Holdovers. That's just not the type of nomination the Oscars do for director. But I knew he would pop his head up, especially at DGA. And then he surprised me at Golden Globes as well. And John M. Chu could have a very similar trajectory here. And I mean, if you want to go back a season before that to a more populist type film, we had Top Gun Maverick of Joseph Kosinski. Very similar stuff where he pops up, but we knew all along he was not getting the Oscar nomination. It's sad that they don't do stuff like this, because I think it would be a very worthy nomination. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. We both talked about our winners. I've brought up a surprise person who I don't think is getting the nomination, but I think could show up in other places. Is there really anyone else that you haven't talked about yet you just want to mention a little bit here in Best Director?
A quick one is Edward Berger, who I have at my number 5 spot. I do feel like this is a nomination that is going to be on the fence all season long. I think he's going to show up quite a few places, but we're still going to feel hesitant on calling him a lock because the film doesn't really put its directorial vision first. It's much more about the writing, same way with Anora. It's TV directing, which isn't a bad thing. It's just he's doing what's in service of the story. I think at the end of the day, he does get in, and I do think that the way that All Quiet on the Western Front got so big after nominations, and I do think that there's a possibility that missing for All Quiet could help him get some steam for Conclave. And I think that we're seeing that with the movie in general.
I mean, you said hypocrite for Wicked. I would say hypocrite for Conclave here. Missing for the last one. Here's the chance to reward you this time around. But no, I agree about Edward Berger and Conclave. And I feel like if Denis Villeneuve ends up missing again, Berger is the one to move in. And I think if Mel Ross for Nickel Boys doesn't come to fruition, Edward Berger is the one to move in, at least for my list. He's right there at number 6. It's just I feel oddly good about my 5, and that's not where you should feel at this point in the race whatsoever. So I want to put him in. It's just that age-old instance that we have with the Oscars. You have 5 slots. you can't fit them all in. Someone's going to be on the outside looking at it. Even though I do believe in Conclave as a top 4 contender, I still just am having trouble fitting him into my 5. And this reminds me back going again to the last time Dune was in the Oscar race, 2021. We had a few, you could call them TV-type movie nominations getting in for a director. You had Belfast with Kenneth Branagh. I like Belfast. No reason why Kenneth Branagh should have been in the director lineup, and I feel like Berger could kind of replicate that here, where it appeals so much to a certain demographic, and it sneaks its way into that top 5, maybe knocking out something much more visually spectacle like Dune Part 2, maybe even something like Emilia Perez if that film kind of falters off the closer we get to nominations, which I personally don't think it will, but I know there's some people out there who do think that. I don't know where to fit Edward Berger in.
Well, thing one, Emilia Perez backlash is overblown. It's not going to be that big when it comes to the actual Academy.
I agree.
It is completely online. We've already seen Emilia Perez win industry awards. It picked up 2 awards at the Hollywood Music Awards, HMMAs or whatever. That is an actual industry precursor. We're already seeing it get those. Thing number 2, difference between Edward Berger and Denis Villeneuve is that Denis Villeneuve for Dune Part 1 had all the precursors. He should have been nominated and he wasn't. Edward Berger for All Quiet on the Western Front only had the BAFTA as a precursor. He was not in the top 5. He surged after the nominations. He would have been nominated had that surge happened earlier, but it didn't. That's the difference I see. I do see the angle of me being a hypocrite, but I do think that Villeneuve and Berger are very different cases. Last thing I'll say is I know a lot of people are putting Coralie Farjat in their top 10 because the BAFTA's rule this year is that there's going to be a maximum of 5 men in the category and at least 1 woman. Doesn't mean that it will be 5 men, 1 woman. It could be 4 men, 2 women, but there will be a limit of 5 men. A lot of people are predicting Coralie Farjat as a potential dark horse because of that BAFTA nomination. Here's my thing. I don't think Coralie Farjat gets the BAFTA nomination. I think it's going to be Payal Kapadia for All We Imagine Is Light. And so I've moved Payal Kapadia into my top 10 because I do believe that she will get a BAFTA nomination.
I think personally it will be 4 and 2, and they both will kind of find their way in. But I think there's also a chance where Substance is the reverse Emilia Perez, where it's much more online and doesn't really translate to the industry the further that we get in. And I think the biggest thing working against Substance right now, the demographic that would go out and vote for it has another controversial international film to push throughout award season from a much bigger distributor with arguably much bigger stars inside of the film, and that's Emilia Perez. And I feel like every place where Substance could use as a launching point, Emilia Perez will be there to overshadow it.
A good friend of mine that I've met over the past few months is an Oscar voter. And so I'm going to be using him as a barometer of what does a 60-year-old man in the Academy recognize. And last night I told him about The Substance and he was like, I have never heard of this before. This is news to me. What is that? It's one person, it's anecdotal, it doesn't mean anything, but this is an Oscar voter saying, what the hell is The Substance?
Let's dive over to original screenplay. If you caught my Virginia Film Festival vlogs, I saw Honora with my mom, with my grandma, 3 different generations of people all loving this film. And that was kind of like the final test for me to show like, hey, everyone can enjoy Honora. It's a movie for the whole family. Sure, there was people in my theater who were very old men who were scoffing at the film, some who got up and left, one who fell asleep. But for the majority, most people seem to like Honora, and in a category where you don't have any other win contender, Honora, it's going to do what you've been saying since you saw it at Cannes, and since I've said since it won the award at Cannes, it's going to sweep the season. There is no number 2 in the category. I don't feel like we really should waste time talking about Honora, because we both have that number 1. Let's talk about other films who are fighting for those 3, 4, 5 slots.
You say there's no number 2. There is a number 2. It's just a very distant number 2. It's Honora, and then a ton of space, and then it's The Brutalist. But The Brutalist has no win equity. But it is clearly the second choice. This is a weird category, right? You've got Honora, The Brutalist, and then A Real Pain. That's the next one. I'd say that's also pretty safe for a nomination. As much as you and I might be lower on this in Best Picture than everyone else, this seems to be most people's consensus number 7 in Best Picture. Neither of us believes this is a Best Picture player. Neither of us believes that Kieran Culkin is getting a nomination. I think we both believe that this is a solo screenplay nomination, and that's it. I do see an angle for it getting a lot of precursors. I just think it falters at the end of the day. Since you've seen the film now, you might might feel the same way about it, right?
And that's the odd thing with Real Pain. I know people will always go like, oh, you didn't like a movie, that's why you aren't projecting awards for it, or you really liked a movie, that's why you're projecting too many awards for it. The whole Substance debate that people had on our video a few weeks ago when we both really liked The Substance, we just don't see an Oscars path for it. And for me, I really enjoyed A Real Pain. Maybe not for the same reasons as many other people out there did. To me, it connected very much more on an emotional level and connecting with Jesse Eisenberg's character more so than the comedy of the film or Kieran Culkin's performance, which to me feels kind of like just a quippy performance. It's very funny, but I don't feel like it's giving much more than that. It just doesn't feel like an Academy type thing, especially for a win. But talking about the screenplay is great. I moved it up to number 3. A Real Pain is basically as close to a lock that you can be in this category. The real debate here is what is 4, what is 5, because there's like 6 movies that could fight for these last 2 spots. Some obviously are a lot stronger, some are obviously a lot weaker, but I feel like all 6 of those films have life to potentially get in.
Yeah, there's a consensus top 3, and beyond that, everyone's going to disagree on what there is. We both agree Challengers feels pretty safe. It was a pretty big film. It checked all the boxes that it needed to in terms of having passion. Yes, just like The Substance, that passion is entirely online. It does not translate into the movie world necessarily. There's an angle for Challengers being here, the same way that there is an angle for The Substance being here. I just think that Challengers is much more accessible. It's much easier. You're not going to alienate people with Challengers, and it's a very writing-heavy movie. We both have that as our number 4. Number 5, that's the hard spot. What goes here? There's an argument for The Substance, as already mentioned. It is hugely original. It is fresh. It's doing so many things that I feel like the writer's branch really likes in a genre that the writer's branch really doesn't like, which is why I'm a little bit hesitant on it. They don't do horror that often outside of Get Out, but it's fresh, it's original, and it won the Cannes Screenplay Prize. Some other things that are floating on the outside of this category for me, there's September 5th, which is like Spotlight in the sense that it's a film about journalism, and it's also taking place mostly in one room. It's a chamber piece with a lot of dialogue. It is a very writer-y movie, which could get it into some precursors, but ultimately, this feels like She Said. Critic groups might push it forward a little bit and go, ooh, how about this one? It's about journalism. We do journalism. But the industry might not respond as strongly to it. There's also The Seed of the Sacred Fig, which is my current pick for number 5. There might be some international voters that could push it through the same way that last year we saw The Zone of Interest get in over Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, of course, Zone of Interest was a picture player. We also saw The Worst Person in the World make it in. We've seen foreign language films that aren't in Best Picture make it into this category before. So that's kind of the lay of the land for me. You might be able to add a few more.
I guess just to go back to one that you mentioned before of September 5th, and I feel like your comparison to She Said's pretty accurate. I feel like both of those films, if they would be more widely seen, probably would get the nomination in the weaker categories of their respective years. Paramount just pushed the release date a few weeks back from its initial day, so most people aren't seeing this film until like the middle of January. That's still before Oscar voting. Voters will have the opportunity to see it before, but the opportunity for buzz won't have the chance to really come to fruition. Some other competitors here in the race, for some reason, the consensus still has Blitz in the top 10 for picture, at least looking at Brother Bro's app. To me, the screenplay is the worst part of Blitz, and it would be something like Elvis, where like Elvis was such a huge Best Picture contender, potentially even top 5, and it still missed out on screenplay because screenplay was generally agreed upon as the worst aspect of the film. Sure, you can point to something like Maestro or 1917 in years past, the Best Picture contenders who find their way into original screenplay. The issue there is 1917, number 2, number 3 for Best Picture. Maestro, while internet people hated that script, it got a lot of precursors that it needed to get that Best Original Screenplay nomination. Blitz, I don't think it's going to show up at places. I don't think it's eligible for WGA. I think it could even miss out on BAFTA, the place that should be going out for in favor of other things. Maybe something like Sacred Fig, as you said before, which would give me more faith in Sacred Fig. And then the last one I want to mention before I dive into my number 5 is Saturday Night, which the downfall of this film seems so crazy, especially considering how high some people seemed on it, because at least to me, it always felt like a solo screenplay movie after seeing seeing the film, I felt even more assured. Solo screenplay. Just no one seemed to care about this film. Sony itself has seemed to basically have given up on this film. I just feel like the further we go into award season, this will be the film that shows up at WGA, shows up at places where the real contenders aren't eligible for, that ultimately misses out on the Oscars at the end of the day. So going back to Best Director last year, I hedged my bets. I was like, I don't know which international director's getting in, so give me both. And I'm kind of doing that for Screenplay, at least for this moment, until the real number 5 cements itself to me. Give me both fun online films, challengers and Substance. Do I actually believe Substance is getting the nomination at the end of the day? No, but I feel better about it than I do with something like Saturday Night, Apprentice, Blitz, Sacred Fig, September 5, or even something as out there as Baby Girl, which for me, I was really looking at it as a potential spoiler for the 5th slot, but it didn't even show up at Gotham, and there's no reason. I know Gotham Oscar overlap isn't great, but there's no reason for that to not even get Screenplay at Gotham. So if it can't get the campaign started there, where really will it start?
The only way I can see Blitz making it in is a war of attrition, where nothing else is clicking, and people are like, well, I guess we'll just go with Blitz. That's like a weird thing to expect to happen, so I'm not calling for that. I don't think that's possible. But let's move over to adapted screenplay, one that strangely feels both more and less competitive.
This year, adapted has stronger top side, while original has more competitors. Because at least, we'll talk about it here a little bit with adapted, I feel like it's between like 6-7 movies for the nomination, while original, you can make the case for 11, but only like 2 of them feel actually safe.
I think that's what it is. With original, both of the top ones are like huge juggernauts. Whereas here, we're looking at Conclave versus Sing Sing. And that feels less important on the Best Picture race than original screenplay. I think that's where I'm feeling with this. Right now, we both have Conclave as our winner, and of course, we both also have Sing Sing as our runner-up. The big battle that's going to happen here is purely on A24. If A24 gets their shit together, if they can mount a campaign and mount a re-release for Sing Sing that gets people out to the theater, that gets people talking about the film in a way that they didn't when it initially released in the summer, then Sing Sing has this in the bag. It would be very easy for Sing Sing to take this award, and that would be a path for it to potentially win Best Picture. At the same time, neither of us really believes that Sing Sing's re-release is going to be that effective. I think we both kind of feel like the film's going to come and go the same way that it did before. And that's why we both have it off of the top spot, with Conclave just walking to an easy win.
At least to me, I don't know if it's as much as not believing that it's going to connect with people. I just don't really believe that it's going to happen in that way. Like, I just don't think that they're going to put it into wide release for people to even have the opportunity to see it. I think A24's version of wide release is going to be like 500 theaters. It's going to be specifically New York, LA, Atlanta, big cities where obviously there's lots of online people there to help spur the conversation. I just think the biggest drawback of Sing Sing right now is, why would people go out and vote for this film? If A24 can give them a legitimate reason, I'll say something bold right here. If Sing Sing wins adapted screenplay, I think it wins Best Picture. I think those two will walk together. If Sing Sing is not winning adapted screenplay, I think Conclave can win and not win Best Picture. I don't think Conclave's dependent on the other. While for Sing Sing, maybe that's a grand statement. I think they work in tandem. Conclave seems like an easy winner. I don't think it would even be like defaulting at the end of the day. I feel like this is what the branch typically likes. It's adapting a source material. Apparently, I haven't read the book, but apparently elevating it. It's fun. It's riveting. It's got big name actors in it, and it's from a top 5 Best Picture movie. It checks off all the boxes. And I mean, there is a world where Conclave can go on to win Best Picture. I don't think the adapted screenplay win for Conclave is reliant on its Best Picture chances.
What I worry about with the Sing Sing re-release is, are they just going to put it in the same theaters that they put it in last time that no one went to? Flopped in the box office. Are they just going to put it in the same places? I know that what they're depending on is this getting a bunch of Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, putting it out in theaters and saying, now go see it. Like they did with Zone of Interest last year, where Zone of Interest, they did a small release and then it got the nominations, then they put it out in theaters, and it made like $40 to $50 million based on that. That was huge for them. The weird thing is that Sing Sing released in the summertime, and they're going to expand the release 7 months later after the Oscar nominations. That's weird to me. And unless they put it in places that they didn't put it in before, if they're just putting it in the same New York theaters, the same Chicago theaters, the same LA theaters, the same Philly theaters, why are more people going to see it than last time?
I guess the last thing to not dog on Sing Sing even more, because I really like this film, is that's the same thing A24 said they're doing for The Brutalists. Can they really do both at the same time?
And which will they give more priority to? Because I think it's going to be The Brutalist. I think that they see more upside for The Brutalist because while Sing Sing has 2 awards potential, it can win Clarence Macklin, it can win Adapted Screenplay. The Brutalist, if they think that can win Best Picture, it comes along with an enormous package. Their priority is going to go to The Brutalist, which has a bigger upside to it. I agree with you that if Sing Sing wins Adapted Screenplay, I don't know if I'd say it would be a cakewalk to win Best Picture, but it would show to me that it's going to perform very well on a preferential ballot, and it is fighting for that top slot with Anora. And I wouldn't know which one takes it. I think I would still lean Anora, but Sing Sing could absolutely do it. So that's a little bit how I feel about that top 2. But I want to draw attention to the film that you have at number 3, I don't have in my top 5. Dune Part 2. Just like with Best Director, you are very high on it in this category, and I am a little bit lower.
At least for me, the biggest thing with Dune and Adapted Screenplay is the same reason why it got the nomination the first time around in a pretty stacked category if we go back to 2022. It is the fact that you're adapting this book that for so long was unadaptable, and specifically with Part 2. The part everyone says is so hard to put to the screen. You have so many storylines that just aren't filmable. And I feel like the way, especially on release, the way that critics, the way that the industry, the way that the audience were talking about the film, for the most part, people enjoy the new switches. They really connected with the story, and I feel like that is essentially what they're getting this nomination off of. Part 2 is apparently the more troublesome version of the story to really put to the screen, and maybe that's a backwards way of thinking about it, but I feel like a Part 1 got the nomination in such a stacked year. This year around, we kind of have the same thing in Adapted Screenplay, and at least to me, while maybe my number 4 is a film that I feel stronger about for a potential upset to raise up in the ranks, Nickel Boys is a film I could see miss the nomination. Well, for me, at least Dune Part 2, I think is pretty safe for the nomination. Not a lock, but pretty safe.
So to contradict you a bit on Dune, the unadaptable part of the book that I feel like people always talked about was the world building. Dune Part 1, that was the part that people were like, how do you set up this world in this time that you have during a movie? How do you set up the politics? Part 2 is the action. And that doesn't feel like it needs to be a screenplay nomination again.
This film's been out for a few months, so spoiler alert, I guess, for Dune Part 2. Timmy's whole switch and Paul turning evil inside the film, that is an aspect I feel like I saw many times online ahead of the film. How are you putting this to the screen? And then all the stuff with Alia and how are you implementing her inside the story? Switching it from the novel instead of having a year time jump or years of time jump, making it just a few months. There's stuff here for them to look out to, especially writers, especially people who are fans of the Dune novels, to be like, hey, they've made switches. And these switches were for the positive.
That is a good point. They did ditch the psychic baby. Kind of. It's now psychic fetus instead of psychic baby. I can see that angle, and I can definitely see the thematic part of it, that this film does so much in terms of talking about cult followings of fanatical leaders, and that could be a good angle for it getting a writing nomination. I think I'm just looking for places that I can take Dune out of. I don't think it's going to max out on nominations when it couldn't even do that for the first one.
That's just our different outlooks for Dune Part 2, at least at this moment, is I see it performing pretty much the same, just with maybe it's missing out on a specific nomination, but it's gaining that back somewhere else. You have it dropping off a little bit from its performance last time around. So I've talked about Dune Part 2. We've touched on the top 2. Is there another film here that you're like, we should all look out for it, whether that's in terms of a nomination or maybe even a spoiler type win?
Well, not a spoiler win. Emilia Perez has no chance of winning this category, but I do think it's much stronger than anyone wants to give it credit for, because we've seen so many musicals in the past not hit in screenplay. West Side Story, for example, was one a few years ago that was seemingly on track to get a nomination, and it missed. And I think it's very easy for us to completely write off musicals because of the track record. But Emilia Perez is an original musical. It might be inadapted, but it is original. The songs are new. It was made for the screen, adapted from a different story. Despite the fact that the screenplay is a bit messy, it's a bit all over the place, it is going to continue picking up nominations through the season. This will be a constant presence that we see through awards season, hitting at BAFTA. I feel like it's going to win the EFA Screenplay Prize over The Room Next Door, which I also have in my top 5. Again, if we're considering this to be a top 3 contender, at least I am, I don't see why it wouldn't make it into a screenplay category. Unless we're showing some significant signs of vulnerability.
I guess for me, it's your Dune argument here for Amelia. I'm looking for a spot I could see it potentially underperform because I currently do not have this inside my top 3. I think this is a film that will perform strong throughout award season. I think specifically this nomination, it will hit there, but I think similar to Killers of the Flower Moon, just in terms of screenplay, not the film overall, it will end up missing at the end of the day for something just more compelling for this branch like Nickel Boys, which I could see kind of perform like Zone of Interest, where it misses at some places. It doesn't make it at Golden Globe, and then it ultimately gets the Oscar nomination at the end of the day because that film is gaining in strength, where Amelia Perez will be strong come Oscar nominations morning. I think will be top 5, but I think that screenplay is a spot where you can find holes inside of the film and you can bring fair criticism. Even people who enjoy the film, like myself, I gave it an 8 out of 10. Screenplay would be the main thing I would point out to. Obviously, I'm not a voter. Voters are out there. They can prove me wrong. I currently have Room Next Door winning the screenplay at EFA. So if Room Next Door does lose, like you're saying, for Amelia Perez, then I will rethink my things, flop them around. That's why I'm just so confused with this adapted screenplay category. I feel so good about my top 5. And we're in November. I should not feel so good about my top 5. So I'm fully expecting either Amelia Perez to come into my lineup and have to knock out Room Next Door and Nickel Boys, or another Netflix title shockingly doing well with the industry being Hitman. Currently, I don't feel like this will happen, but if you think Glenn Powell is winning the Golden Globe Comedy Musical Actor, it can maybe sneak its way into the Comedy Musical top 6. Critics' Choice could throw it nominations in Adapted Screenplay. And then at that point, WGA, there's so many international films here. It has a spot for it there. It's a film I feel like will show up consistently throughout awards season. It's just is an Oscars thing.
The thing with Hitman is it can only go as far as Netflix is going to allow it to, and I don't think Netflix will allow it to go very far. That could be the film that shows up at every writing precursor as a spot filler, and it's never a real thing. It's just there because of lack of options. And honestly, I would say I think even Wicked has a better chance, just because Wicked's more visible. Do I think Wicked has a shot at getting in? Not much. I mean, it's a musical adaptation. While Amelia Perez is an original musical, we've seen original musicals make it in the past. Wicked being an adaptation, it's given me flashbacks to West Side Story. It's given me flashbacks to Les Mis because they're an adaptation of a Broadway show.
For Wicked, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's West Side Story. West Side Story was top 5, top 4 in Best Picture. That is up for debate. That's just how I feel. I think it ended up being number 2 in director, therefore making it a little bit higher. But yeah, there was no reason to nominate in screenplay because what was new inside of West Side Story? The one positive thing that Wicked has going for it is the additional dialogue sequences, but most criticism out there for the film outside the lighting is kind of for those additional dialogue sequences, extending out some of the scenes that didn't really need to be. So yeah, put it in your 10. It's in Best Picture. It kind of needs to be in your top 12. I know I have a Complete Unknown in Best Picture. I don't have it in my 10 for Screenplay. And I guess just a touch on Complete Unknown, I still believe in it for Picture, even after the reactions. Just I could see Piano Lesson or Nosferatu get a screenplay nomination even if I don't have them in Picture. Just more of that typical, like, hey, it's not a 10 for 10 overlap sort of thing. And going back to the Elvis comparisons for A Complete Unknown, yes, Elvis ended the season at 6 or at 7, but I feel like over here in Adapted, if they're going to do a more musically focused film, they have Amelia. They don't really need A Complete Unknown.
That's confusing to me. I was ready to end the video, but now you said that you don't think A Complete Unknown has any chance in screenplay. And I guess the argument I can see is Elvis didn't make screenplay, Bohemian Rhapsody didn't make screenplay. Music biopics don't need screenplay to make it in. They are formulaic, they hit all the beats that they need to. But at the same time, not even top 10?
I mean, it was top 10 before I added Wicked in, and it's just, what do I take out? Hitman and Piano Lesson are going to be two of those films that fill out those adapted screenplay nominations where stuff like Amelia Perez, Room Next Door.
The WGA is going to go for Hitman or The Piano Lesson over A Complete Unknown.
Yes. They're more writery type movies, especially Hitman that has a branch favorite.
Bohemian Rhapsody. Let's see if that got WGA. Yeah, that's hilarious. Of all of the prizes Bohemian Rhapsody got, the only time it was nominated for Best Screenplay was at the Australian Academy Awards. Nowhere else gave it a screenplay nomination. I don't know, man. I just think if you're predicting Timmy to be number 1 in Best Actor, if you're predicting this to be in the top 10 for Best Picture, you should at least consider it above something like The Piano Lesson that is nothing.
Well, if I were to take out something, it would be Nosferatu. So we can... A Complete Unknown's my number 11, so it's not like it's out of the race. Like it's there. I just think our final nomination is between the top 7 and everything Wicked and below.
It's not getting a nomination. We're squabbling between things that have no chance.
Well, speaking of no chance, you out there have a chance to comment below and let us know your thoughts on our predictions here. I'm sure that one of us has said something that you greatly disagree, and we appreciate when you out there let us know you disagree because it gives us fun things to then talk about in our next episode. But we're recording our technical and craft work predictions right after this video, so expect those like pretty soon.
Let's take bets. The picture video people yelled at us about The Substance. The acting video people yelled at us about Daniel Craig. What do you think are what do you think the thing that people are going to yell at us about this time is?
Oh, John Chu, director. If they actually watch the video,
okay,
they'll get mad at the John Chu segment. If they just look at the graphics and skim through, Denis winning director.
No, I think it's both of our director winners. I think people are going to yell at you for Denis, and they're going to yell at me for Jacques Audiard. I anticipate the comments telling us that we're a fucking joke for our director predictions. I will cherish them. It's going to be great. But anyways, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, my name's Matt.
My name's Dyl, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.